Good day. Welcome to the Cory Morgan Show. I am indeed Cory Morgan. This is my hour every week with the Western Standard where I cover some news, get some ranting out, and talk to interesting guests who offer us insight on all sorts of issues. And today is no exception. Is a good show. I got Dan McTeague coming on in a little while. He's with Canadians for Affordable Energy, or you might know him more for GasBuddy.com. He did a lot of work as pointing people in the right direction to find good prices at the pump for gasoline, and a lot of work analyzing fuel prices, energy prices, things such as that. And of course, it's a big issue going on right now. As well, I put that as the afterthought, he was actually a Liberal member of Parliament back in the day. These were pre-Trudeau days. And if you've seen Mr. McTeague's commentary these days, he's not a big fan of the Trudeau Liberals. He's of more of the old stock when Liberals were still somewhat sane versus the ideological lunatics we have under Prime Minister Hammerhead. So let's get on to speaking of the actions of Prime Minister Trudeau and some of the things his government has done, and some of the stuff that's really been hitting the fan out in the West lately this week. So her words were loaded and uncompromised. So when the Western Standard's Nigel Hannaford at a press conference the other day asked Premier Danielle Smith what she will do to fend off the proposed federal incursion into Alberta's jurisdiction with electrical generation, she finished her answer basically saying, "We will go our own way." That's her own words. Now, Smith isn't saying the government's going to pursue an independence referendum in Alberta anytime soon, but she's well aware, too, that her statement left room for people to take that as an unspoken threat. Alberta's premier is an experienced and skilled communicator. Her choice of words was no mistake. Now, in the near future, Alberta will go its own way with the current plan to reach net zero emissions by 2050, no matter what Ottawa thinks. The goalposts, though, are 15 years apart, whereas, Guilbeault wants to reach that goal at 2035. And there's little indication that Guilbeault or Smith are willing to even entertain the notion of changing their targets. So this battle is just beginning. Now, Guilbeault's following the typical Liberal playbook. He's slapping down the West to win support in the East. The net zero electric generation targets are going to be easily met in Ontario and Quebec, where they're rich in hydroelectric resources and they have nuclear reactors. The 2035 net zero target for Alberta, though, is utterly impossible to reach without crippling Alberta's economy and threatening domestic energy security. Right now, fossil fuel supplies almost 80% of the province's energy needs, and that can't change that much in 12 short years. The province has no major rivers to dam, and the way Canada works, it would take decades to get a large-scale nuclear power generation plant up and running if it was ever even approved. I mean, despite years and in billions in investment in solar and wind generation projects, they still only supply a small percentage of the Alberta power grid. And they'll always need to be backed up with gas generators for the days when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. It does happen. Smith can't bend on that, and she won't bend. And Guilbeault won't budge either. So what next? Well, this battle's surely going to head to Canada's courts, and it'll move at the typical glacial pace. So it's going to be a war fought in slow motion with plenty of heated rhetoric as the challenges creep through the system. Eventually, the Supreme Court will rule on the dispute, and it will rule in favor of the Liberal government. I mean, the Constitution's little more than a set of suggestions when it comes to protecting Alberta's constitutional authority and jurisdiction in energy generation. We established that when the Supreme Court upheld the carbon tax. The court is stacked, and when it feels that it's in the public good, particularly Central Canada's public good, when it feels it's better to step on Alberta's rights in that case, it'll step on Alberta's rights every time. Now, Premier Smith is saying she's willing to pull out all the stops to stop Ottawa's incursion upon the province. Now, time will tell if she really means it, though, because once the battle is finished in the courts and Alberta has lost, the federal government will then move on to the punitive stage if we don't cooperate out here in the West. They'll cut transfer payments as they demand capitulation, and the impact Albertans will be harsh. We'll be starved of the transfers of our own money back to us. At this point, there's only going to be one thing that'll make Ottawa back off. Alberta needs to begin the process of truly going its own way. No doublespeak, no veiled threats. Alberta needs to work towards invoking a referendum on independence under the Clarity Act. The only other option is a surrender to the Trudeau Liberals, and that would only open the door, of course, to more incursions. We might as well just give up having a provincial government. No, I don't expect Premier Smith to start threatening a move towards provincial independence, at least not yet. Most Albertans would still prefer to see the standoff somehow settled within Confederation, or at least for now. Once all the legal challenges have failed and all of the tools have been taken out of the toolbox, used and broken, only one path is going to remain, and that's the path to full independence. Now, time will tell whether Premier Smith is going to be willing to take that path. She is the most independence-minded, inclined premier Alberta's had to date, though, so we got some interesting times ahead of us. All right, so that's kind of where I'm setting the stage today. We got an interesting fall coming along in politics, as always. So let's get in with our news editor, Dave Naylor, though, and see what else is happening out there in the world for our check-in. Hey, Dave, how you doing?
I'm doing okay, Cory. How are you handling the heat?
Oh, I like it. I love heat. Bring it on.
I thought you were more of a winter guy.
No, I despise winter. Jane likes the cooler weather, yes. You've heard me whine about winter enough to know how much I hate it.
I had a laugh this week on some of the other media's headlines where it's, heat warning, temperatures to soar, take precautions. It's going up to 30 degrees and it's summer. Like, what do people expect? It's summer.
Well, it seems this is the first time ever. I mean, they act like it, don't they? I remember many 30-degree days when I was a kid, too. I'd still be kicked out of the house and have to deal with it. I survived.
Exactly. Come back when the sun's going down. One group of people, Cory, that's not having a very good time this summer right now is in the Northwest Territories, and that's where some of our news focus has been this morning. RCMP charged some kids with starting an arson fire up there, and that's sort of continuing along the way that Alberta went and parts of BC, where all these fires break out, and then it turns out, it's not climate change; it's actually arson. So we've got the story up there with some RCMP supplied video of the kids setting the fire. The fire itself is now within 16 kilometers of Yellowknife, the capital of the Northwest Territories. So things there are tense, and they're praying for some rain, but I don't think it's coming. Also praying for rain are the people down near Pincher Creek. That area is the latest in Alberta to be declared a disaster area for the crops because of the lack of rain. We've got a story from our business expert, Sean Polzer, on how the influx of people moving here from other places in Canada has kept the Calgary housing market booming. House prices in Vancouver and Toronto compared to Calgary. Calgary is about half the price. And we've got a story on, if you remember, Cory, during the pandemic, the Liberals had all these ventilators stored away, spent like hundreds of millions of dollars on them, never used. Well, now apparently a lot of them have been given to the Ukraine to help in their war effort. So that's what we've got up now. Coming up shortly, we've got a former NBA player musing about throwing on a wig and joining the Women's League, as men are doing with a lot of women's sports these days to try and mock gender. And he figures he could score 60 points a game in the Women's League. And he's 7 foot tall, Cory, so I wouldn't put it past him. And Mr. Polzer's got a story coming up on Germany, desperate for natural gas, buying it from other places in the world because, as Prime Minister Trudeau said, no business market here for it, Cory. None at all. So
wonderful. Well, I guess one bright side, maybe the WNBA will finally get a little bit of a bump in its ratings.
Yeah, they're not very good. And hey, speaking of women's sports, shout out to the English women's soccer team. Made the final. It's England's first World Cup final since 1966. So we're all going to have to get up early Sunday morning, middle of the night, and watch that game.
I look forward to you telling me how it went.
You know I will.
All right. Thanks, Dave.
Take care, Cory.
That is our news editor, Dave Naylor. As you can hear, there are lots of things. News items are always coming down the pipe. We're constantly putting them up. I think near 50 pieces a day sometimes are going up there. There are no other news sites in the West, or I think in Canada, that are really putting up that much news content, our own content. We have reporters, we have columnists. Those pieces are getting up there. The reason we can do that, guys, is because of subscribers. We're independent media. We've been banned. Well, I wouldn't say banned, but we can't put our stuff on Facebook anymore. You know, the battle's going on with Ottawa because they're trying to bail out their legacy media buddies. We're not with that bunch, but we need subscribers to do it. So keep that in mind. If you subscribed already, thank you very much. We really appreciate it. If you haven't, get on there, westernstandard.news/membership. It's $9.99 a month. $100 a year, like a newspaper subscription, and it'll get you past that pesky paywall, and you can see all those stories as they're coming. Hey, come on, help share our stuff, get it out there, spread it around. We can build that audience. We don't have to let the government dictate how media is going to work in this new and changing world with things. And yeah, we cover some fun and interesting stories. That NBA one's interesting. We saw that in Canada recently with, I guess it was a female power lifter, or a former male power. I can't keep up with the terms anymore. Trans doesn't bother me. I'm not as hung up on it with some other people. Hey, if that's your thing, good for you, right on. I'll certainly refer to anybody by whatever gender pronouns they prefer once they've told me, or whatever, things like that. But we can't keep trying to deny physiological realities. That's where the problem hits. We can't pretend that there's not a physiological advantage when somebody's entering women's sports if they were initially biologically a male. There's just no pretending. They're asking us to set aside reality. And it's unfair. It's unfair to the women who trained so hard, who put that time in to try and compete. We see that in the swimming, and now we're seeing with powerlifting, of course. I don't know. Reality's got to sink in. And the thing is, what it does is it sparks up with the absurdity when the activists push into areas like that, is the backlash ends up hitting other people who just want to live their lives and move on. It adds to the division and actually generates some of the hate, because there are some hateful people out there. But it's just getting ridiculous. So maybe, though, I'm sure it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but if an NBA individual is talking about popping into the WNBA and taking part, well, maybe it helps expose a little bit of just, how stupid it's getting, guys. I'm not seeing any people who are born biologically female trying to get into the NFL. For some reason, that just doesn't seem to work out, even though apparently biologically they're the same. It doesn't seem to happen. All right. But anyway, we get those stories. The other one is, with Yellowknife, and Arthur Green was covering that. He's always covering a lot of stuff up in Edmonton and our Alberta stuff. And we're seeing that a lot. We're seeing that these fires, yes, they're unusual this year. They're high. But what's also high is once they investigate, the amount that were set by people. And the legacy media is jumping all over Premier Smith because she wouldn't jump on the global warming bandwagon with it. She pointed out that we've got an arson problem. And we do. We found that in Yellowknife. Yes, here yet again, more arsonists behind it. Now, the bush is tinder dry, and we are in the midst of a bad drought throughout the West right now. So, it's going to burn harder and hotter, and we can debate the rationale behind it. But it's not spontaneous combustion, guys. We've had people getting behind it. The earth isn't boiling, but it is hot right now. Don't light fires in the trees. So either way, I hope for the best for people, but we will report on those things even if legacy media doesn't want to talk about it, because those are the facts and those are press conferences. That wasn't a theory coming out of Yellowknife. I saw that. That was a press conference from the RCMP in Yellowknife. Yes, they'd arrested 4 guys for lighting the fires up there. So let's just point to where the problems really are. Speaking of problems, speaking of stupid, I love speaking of stupid. It's one of my favorite subjects, and there's never a short pool to draw from when it comes to our federal government. So Export Development Canada, I saw this gem. This is beautiful. They are unsure of recovering millions it loaned for aircraft engines to a Mexican airline. So a startup little domestic airline in Mexico, I guess they wanted to get some airplanes. They needed engines. So what do? They gave our Canadian tax dollars to this Mexican airline, said, here, we'll lend you that because, we know that your credit risk is low, right? And you can run that great Mexican airline business. There's no corruption or incompetence in Mexico. That doesn't happen down there. Well, lo and behold, they've gone broke. Now, why would they take millions of Canadian tax dollars, and they still haven't disclosed how many, and give them to a Mexican airline startup? Well, of course, all roads always lead to Quebec when it comes to business subsidies. So it was Pratt & Whitney that was manufacturing these engines, which is based, of course, in Quebec. So it's not enough just to take our money from productive regions, such as Alberta, Saskatchewan, and dump it into Quebec, the unproductive, the parasites of the country, and into things like Bombardier and Pratt & Whitney. It's not enough just to give the money to those companies, because even with all those subsidies, obviously their products are crap, because the only way we can get people to buy them is to give them the money to buy our products. Brilliant. Just brilliant. And so now These engines, who knows where they are? They probably melted them down in Mexico and sold them for some pesos and moved back into the drug cartels where there's more, less corruption than dealing with the Canadian government. This is our tax dollars at work. This is what happens. We see this all over. I mean, people keep talking about that. Look, guys, the solution is less government. It's less. We need government out of the way. You want to help the economy. It's not going to be through government trying to pick winners and losers and micromanaging and taking money from the productive and giving it to the useless. But we keep trying, and this happens on the city level. We saw this a while back when Mayor Naheed Nenshi was in charge of Calgary. We had Calgary Economic Development. They give it a nice little name, make it sound like a Chamber of Commerce or something like that. No, what it is a crown, an arm's length corporation set up by the city of Calgary that was given $100 million slush fund to try and draw business to the city. As far as I could tell, they had Rocket Space downtown, which went broke after a few months, and a few other pathetic, lackluster victories, if you want to call it that. And otherwise, they just seem to hire some well-connected people for some really good money to talk about how they're going to help the city while not actually doing anything. But that's the usual course of these sorts of things. And likewise, on a bigger scale, there's Economic Development Canada doing the same thing. And they're taking our dollars and they're pouring them in. Speaking of Nenshi, I haven't spoken to him a lot lately. He's always been one of my favorite political punching bags, I guess you could say. He's been quiet lately. No, too many people have missed his voice. But as we saw in the Standard, it sounds like, our publisher, Derek Fildebrand, came up. He's had a source within the NDP. And it appears that Rachel Notley could be resigning probably within the next month or two, as we get into the fall session. This isn't that surprising. I mean, Notley's been in office for quite some time. She was the premier, of course, for one term, then got, lost an election. Then she lost an attempt to get back into it. So, I mean, she's tired out. I can't see them. I mean, a lot of people saying she'll stick with it because they have nobody else. Well, yeah, but eventually you have to turn it over and you have to try. So I suspect it's true. She is going to go, but then you start wondering who will they replace her with. And then she's one of the names that pops up. I see Marcel saying, don't speak of him, please. Sorry, I won't say his name too many more times or he might appear. But, it's one of the names that Fabio, or otherwise known as Thomas Lukasik, is another name that's bounced around, somebody who went into the political background, but he still beaks off from the distance on things. He wants to be involved. He wants to feel important. I wouldn't be shocked to see him throw his hat in. And yeah, there's any number of NDP members and so on from Notley's caucus that I could see may taking a run for the job. But can we see anybody who's really going to take that party and run with it? I'll have to say his name one more time. Nenshi, I could see him gaining Calgary support, but the problem is he's not an NDP loyalist. I can't see him winning their leadership for a couple of things. He's not a good team player. He's not going to do well with the caucus. He's not going to get support from the workers within the NDP. That's why positions like mayor, where you're kind of an individual, worked for him. So the other thing is they want people to come up through their union ranks and all the rest of it. So even though politically I could see it, he could be one that could put them over the edge. I hate to say it, but there's still some people in Calgary that like that guy. If he was leading the NDP, he could potentially pull those votes over to win Calgary. I just can't see him taking or maintaining the NDP leadership, though, in order to do so. And of course, to be fair, he's never shown any interest in that. That's just pure speculation. But we know that guy isn't gone yet. He's my age. He's 52. That's still pretty young in politics. He's not giving up. So we're going to see him surface somewhere. Whether it's a run for the NDP leadership, again, I doubt it, but who knows? But the time to start speculating is now. At least that's what we like doing. I mentioned earlier, so there's been that battle over C-18. We can't put it's a shakedown. The Liberal government has been bailing out legacy media outlets. I mean, they've been outright, taking millions and giving it to outlets. And they thought another way we can do this is to put the screws to Google and Facebook, and start charging them for providing links. It's ridiculous. It was like charging a paper boy for delivering papers. It was stupid. And it backfired and it failed. And now, though, we're paying the price. Canadians can no longer see news links on Facebook and probably soon on Google. And people saying, I never read my news on Facebook. No, that wasn't the point. It wasn't reading the news there. That's how you found your way to it. It was a tool. And we've lost that tool. But part of the battle now that Facebook didn't bluff, they said, we don't need to put these news links up, and they stopped. The government said, well, we'll get them back. We'll stop advertising with Facebook because they spent money on Facebook ads. Well, Not all of them did, though. If you're going to have a government boycott, guys, you got to get all your little ducks in a row, and they don't seem to have done that well. But again, we're talking about liberal competency, right? So records at Meta Platforms Incorporated showed that, Citizen Services Minister, so Cabinet Minister Terry Beach, a liberal cabinet minister, is buying Facebook ads. He's still giving tax dollars to Facebook to buy ads, even though the government is supposedly boycotting it. These guys are inept. And we're hearing that sort of speculation that Justin Trudeau may be at the end of his time as well. And we'll see. I think he's going to go. I mean, there's people really disputed that. There was discussion on Twitter quite a bit ahead of that. Is Trudeau going to go or not? But you see, I think, and I don't think it was planned. I'm not that, he's not that deep in whatever. His marriage has clearly got issues going on. There's a separation. Things are going on. But it gives him an out. And I mean, it wasn't a planned out, but he can use it because right now he's floundering. He doesn't know what to do. He's won 2 minority governments back to back. They're not going to tolerate him winning a 3rd minority or even losing the election, as it looks like he would right now. And he's not brilliant, but he probably could have realized that, okay, shuffling cabinet didn't do it. I just can't seem to gain traction in these polls. People are saying he loves the job too much. He's got too much ego. He won't step aside. I say it's the other way around. He does have enough of a brain in that little head of his, not a lot, but enough, to realize that if he runs again, he's going to get electorally spanked. He's going to be punted out of that seat, and it's going to be humiliating. This way he could say, I've done all I can, and now I want to be fair to Canadians. I want to be fair to my family and go spend time with them, and he'll step back. And he'll leave the mess for someone else to try and clean up. But we'll see. It's always speculation. I got a feeling within the next couple of months we're not going to see Prime Minister Trudeau. And some other people saying, well, he won't call an election right now. And he's like, no, he won't. And that's what I'm talking about. The timing is about right, actually, if you're going to do it. Because that gives 2 years roughly if you were going to hopefully maintain the Liberal government that long. It gives 1 year, and that's how long these things take almost, around now, or the better part of one, for them to have a leadership race, find and get whoever they want to have as a leader, and it gives them a year to try and establish themselves before they have to go to the polls. Because if he waits too long, then at that point, they don't have the timeline to do it, and he's going to be in there for the end. So right now would be the time when he'd be considering stepping back and getting somebody else in there. Other people, there's speculation. Somebody's saying he thinks the Trudeau separation is a hoax. I don't know. I don't think the conspiracies are that deep. They love him or loathe him, and I think most of us here loathe him. I know I certainly do. But he is human. He is, and his relationships are real, and I'm sure they have their ups and downs, and good and bad, and things just parted ways. I can't see any political advantage in having that split happen and go on like that. So, I mean, I just, no, sorry, guys. I think he's going with it, but it was certainly nothing planned. You're always better off if you're in a political position to have a stable family unit going on. It just looks better and it's less headache. So, no, I don't think it's fake, and I don't think that he wanted to go that way necessarily. But who knows how long they've been having problems. Here's an interesting one. So the federal court rejected a test case of quarantine orders. So, there's a lot of things hitting the courts. I was talking earlier with how slowly Canada's court system works. And it is with every challenge and with everything that happens within it right now. Well, there was a case going forward, basically saying charter rights were breached with a lot of the mask and vaccine mandates, and they certainly were. I mean, I don't think many people can look at that and say, no, the rights weren't breached with the travel restrictions and things like that. The question is whether it was a justifiable breach. But what gets me now is the government saying, well, now, this is all over, and this is what the judge herself said. I think it was her. I'm sorry, it's a name I can't pronounce. So it sounds feminine, but it could be a male. Doesn't really matter. What the judge said is there's no longer a live controversy. The dispute has disappeared since mandates are no longer enforced. Thus, we don't need to hear this case. Well, hang on a minute. We need it more than ever. Just because it's done doesn't mean we don't still try it and find out whether it was worth doing. I mean, that'd be like saying, well, the murder is done. The guy's dead. What do we want to waste time in court and everything going over it? I mean, he's not going to be any less dead, for having done so. Of course, we got to put this through the courts, because what happens the next time? And we know there's going to be a next time. That's why you run this through the courts now. Even though the restrictions are gone, we have to evaluate this. So we do have a basis the next time a government tries to do this to us all. That's what our courts are for. But no, this court said, no, we're not gonna re-examine this because it's done. Well, no, guys, no. We got some big issues, and you know what? I mean, I'm not as far over with some of the people with some of the thoughts they had on it as to why vaccines were what or what the pandemic was. But clearly the government did mislead a lot of people. It did overreact in a lot of ways. It certainly infringed on rights. I still get people on my case, because I've always talked about that. I got jabbed twice. I didn't get any more boosters. I talk about those things. But they get upset with me for even having done that, some people. Hey, it was my choice. There's where we get it clear, guys. I support your choice. I've always opposed the vaccine passports. I always opposed the mandates. I oppose the masking. You want to go out and get vaccinated, though? By all means. You don't want to? Don't. We've got some people on the fringe, and I'll say that, fringe side saying my even participating in the vaccination shouldn't have happened. Well, then you're infringing on my choice, so kiss my ass. Goes both ways, guys. But I think we made choices based on a lot of bad information from a government that, like I said, was overreacting. I think there's a lot of questions to be asked about the amount of money they spent on those vaccines. Who did do well out of all that? I mean, they're pushing for fall boosters to come up for this year already. But as we've seen, only 6% of Canadians have gotten a booster in the last 6 months. We're done. We're sick of it. We're finished with it. We're not listening to the medical experts on this one anymore. We're tired of being told that we're supposed to be afraid. We're tired of being pressured into taking medications we don't feel comfortable with. So the next time this happens, and like I said, it's going to happen again, I don't think people are going to be nearly as docile and compliant as we were last time. Been through this once before. And Lord help us if it turns out that it really is a bad virus that's going around that could kill people, without a proper vaccine or medication or quarantines and things like that. What if it's something that is far, far worse than COVID ever was? But now we've lost so much trust with the state that people won't cooperate. And even then, I'll tell you what, I won't support mandatory orders. You know what? If people were dropping in the streets from COVID, and they weren't, if it was hitting young people, it never did. If it was killing healthy people, it never did. People would have chosen to take on any mandates and things to try and avoid the spread of that disease. They wouldn't need the gun to their head. I know there's always individuals who wouldn't bother, but most people, believe it or not, aren't that bad. A lot of people are really stupid, but they aren't necessarily all that bad. Either way, we need to go into those things. Alberta, after saying the judge said that if the mandates were properly declared, they wouldn't have violated the Constitution. No, not exactly. Mandates like that violate it, period. I think most judges agree. It's just that they use Section 1, which is when you start inserting the word reasonable limits or things like that, which leaves it very wide open to interpretation. And then you can sort of set aside those things. But it was definitely infringement. When it came to travel, I mean, that was a clear infringement. I mean, it's important to have a right of mobility or the right to assembly. That's a big right. That's a serious one. It's an important one. I mean, it might not seem as important now as it used to be. The reason the right for free assembly was written into charters of rights across the world, in the democratic world, was because governments, authoritarians, one of the things they never want people to do is organize against them. And the way they would have to do it, days prior to social media or even telephones, you'd have to all get together in the basement of a pub or at a barn or wherever you had to and actually organize person to person. And if the government could break up those organizing, that gathering, or even unions, things like that, they could stop it from happening. That's why the right to gather with other people is entrenched. That right was suspended. We couldn't go to weddings. We couldn't go to funerals. One in a lifetime, events. Opportunity. I mean, I guess it depends on the wedding. Graduations, things such as that. We lost those. We had our right to assembly violated. And that was suspended on the basis of Section 1. You can't, no judge with a straight face should be able to look and say that the right wasn't suspended. It certainly was. Certainly was. Either way, yeah, we got a lot of scary stuff to look at in hindsight. But there's a lot of misunderstanding. People don't understand rights. We take them for granted. We are a spoiled country. We have a lot of that. We look at the Emergencies Act. That was when our rights were suspended. That's the point of the act. Because I had people arguing with me, no, it's not. Nothing was violated. Yes, it was. Yes, it was. That's the point of something as extreme as the Emergencies Act, is to say, this is so important, we need an act where we can set aside rights to get this under control. It should be only for something as extreme as true riots from coast to coast or alien invasions. And even then, I'm not sure if I'd trust the government to invoke it. But the rights are suspended. You suddenly lose that right to assembly, that right to travel. In our case, rights, well, not we ever really have, but rights to property when our bank accounts were suspended and stolen. I shouldn't say ours, mine wasn't, but many people's were. This was not a minor thing. Made Canada sound like a tin pot dictatorship. But our rights, we take them for granted. And so now again, when we get to the point when we can look with hindsight, we have judges saying, no, we aren't even going to re-examine what happened. That's very distressing. It's very problematic because it means we've learned nothing. Well, we have. The judges haven't, or they don't want us to have. And yeah, I don't think the next time, and as I said, there'll be another time, people are going to take it as well. Plus, we're seeing the ramifications of it all now. Things we warned about. I mean, look at the inflation rate now. Look at the stuff that happened with supply chains and how hard the state and the government and the pathetic legacy media were in saying, no, it had nothing to do with the supply chains. Of course it did. You morons locked people down for 2 years. You shut down travel. What do you think would happen? It was a whiplash effect. Eventually, the places that used to produce goods and services, those products got bunged up. They didn't make it through consistently. They didn't make it through directly. Prices for things spiked. Other things ran out. And we're still dealing with it. Construction, we got a lot of issues for why the housing crisis is happening. But I mean, part of the impact on, again, development, expansion, and construction for a year and a half and some, let's not pretend that didn't have an impact on it. Another area, here's some data, secondstreet.org. It's Colin Craig who runs that. He's been on the show a number of times. And this is an interesting one I saw. So from Ontario Health, it indicates the number of patients who died waiting for surgery. Now, this is the big hornet's nest open in Canada, but it's true. Died waiting for surgery in 2022 to 2023 is up 49% from 2021, 2022. And people say, well, if it was just a small amount, it could sound a lot higher. Okay, well, let's get to those numbers. 2,100 people died waiting for surgery in Ontario in that period. A couple thousand people. Let's talk about the people who died with something that's preventable. All of those 2,100 died just because the timeline was too long? No, probably not all of them, but a lot did. I mean, you don't have to be a doctor to know time is of the essence. When it comes to any kind of ailment, injury, the faster you can get diagnosed and treated, the better your chances of survival or lack of true dire consequences. Canada's health system is failing. It has been for a while. And its access. This highlights the problem. We will declare an emergency over something that, again, that youth were immune to, and turn the country on its nose. And we have thousands of people dying waiting for surgical care because we're too stubborn to admit that Canada's socialized monopoly healthcare system is a failure because we've built our stupid national identity around it. Oh, the greatest Canadian was the founder of Canada's healthcare system. Look, we only share our system with North Korea and Cuba. Think about that. We got to chip away at this. People are dying waiting for care. Socialized medicine is rationed medicine. That's always the problem when you get this sort of thing. Sure, it's free, but you know what it's worth to have free medicine when you're dead? Yeah, nothing. And people are fleeing the country to get care elsewhere. One of the things I had that I believe it was when I had Colin Craig on, he talked about a lot of Canadian doctors and healthcare professionals have been leaving Canada. They're setting up shop in other countries. And guess what? So Canadian people are taking their dollars, leaving the country, and getting Canadian practitioners to work on them outside of the country where they're allowed to pay for it. Nobody's saying, not many, I'm sure not saying nobody, because that's where the conversation always goes. Oh, you want credit card care, you want people to die, for lack of money and such as that. No, that's not the case at all. But we have to stop being so intransigent and stubborn with our system, and realize that it's going to have to make some changes. I mean, these aren't cracks anymore. These are people dying. And the rate with which this is happening, like I said, in 1 year, the number of people dying waiting for care went up 49%. That's an alarm bell, guys. That's a big one. And again, thousands of people dying. So we'll light the world on fire over a handful dying. But when it's truly something going on when it comes to Canada's sacred healthcare system, we're terrified of even considering reform. Okay, I've been blathering long enough. I see Mr. McTeague in the waiting area. It looks like you're panting there. I saw you were going to be a little bit delayed, but you made it there. We can still chat here before the end of the show. So thanks for coming on, Dan.
Good to be here, Cory. Sorry, Toronto traffic. Parking lot, the whole darn town.
Oh, we understand. Well, put you in the right mood for our chat. We still got 10 minutes here. So you're with the Canadians for Affordable Energy, and boy, you've got to have a busy, busy time. I mean, you're very outspoken on social media, but energy costs, I mean, inflation in general, and of course, energy costs impact all of it all the way down the line, are pressuring everybody. But our government, I guess I'll just kind of start you there, seems to want to do nothing more than make things even more expensive for us.
More expensive and more confrontational in being expensive. They're driven by an ideology that basically says energy can be any price. It doesn't really matter. Canadians will go along with it as long as you can contrive and connive and tell them that the world is coming to an end. I won't get into the science of this all, but the economics clearly indicates there's a big problem in this country. You have a government that's allowed energy prices to go through the roof two ways. Their green policies on carbon taxes, which, Cory, you've talked about many, many times. And the second that's not discussed as much is the blocking of pipelines and regulations, which is discouraging investments leaving the country. And with it, a drop in the Canadian dollar, which is only worth 135 pennies to buy $1. Cory, that adds significantly to the price of everything. In terms of gasoline in your province, about 26 cents a liter. In my province, 28. In the Maritimes, with a 15% HST, more like 30. These are real factors driving the cost of living through the roof. Yes, and you can talk about monetary policy and the government overspending and printing too much money and all these other things, but we keep tap dancing around what is, in my view, the elephant in the room. Even the Bank of Canada has to recognize now, finally, after 2 terms of saying gasoline is in fact driving inflation up and down. When it's down, of course, the Liberals take credit for it. When it's up, they're conspicuously silent, as we saw today, or I should say yesterday, when an announcement came that, in fact, inflation is up again. Reality is this is a country blessed with an abundance of energy, and we are despoiling and ruining it for generations and undermining not just affordability, but I think the benefit and the gift that has been given to every Canadian of energy resources the world desperately wants, but which we have a few ideologues in Ottawa preventing it from happening.
Yeah, I mean, we are an energy powerhouse, or we should be. I mean, the natural resources we're blessed with, whether it is the hydro in the east or the natural gas and oil we have in the west, but we have an ideologically driven federal government that doesn't want us to export it even. I mean, not even talking about our domestic, use of this, because it's kind of ridiculous that we have so many energy resources. We pay such a high domestic price, but we have a prime minister telling us there's no business case to export it to other countries.
And then lying, as his Minister of Environment has done on many occasions, saying, these are industries that are making tons of profit. Let them pay their fair share rather than passing it on to consumers. I'm not surprised. Maybe he's dangling a few too many buildings and bridges and whatnot. But the reality is, for most of us who have spent a bit of time in politics, some of us in the real private sector, in the real world, and those of us trying to struggle to make ends meet. I don't come from a family of great wealth. My parents both lost their shirts back in the 1980s when the last Trudeau government spent so heavily that we wound up with 24% interest rates. I think the country is going down that road again. And when you have leaders in this country who are determined not just to impose something that they know cannot work. Germany's proven that renewables do not work. France is having trouble having to look back at coal. The UK is completely in a mess. It wants to now get back into permitting leases to get natural gas. Canada has all of these advantages, and yet we have a group of people in Ottawa elites committed to shutting down the country's resources, and as a result and as a consequence, shutting down our economy. It's only a matter of time before another bond rating agency comes in, downgrades our credit. And if you think, 6 or 7% interest rates are tough to handle, wait till that happens and you have to pay 10 or 11. Then I think things will get very real. And those here, my neck of the woods in Toronto, who live in fantasy world and believe that their food is delivered by stork or by pixie dust, will now have to get more real about the direction taken. It's a very deliberate policy by this government to undermine the Canadian economy by throwing out everything that's good in favor of things they know did not work.
So, I believe citizens are catching on. We see it in our pocketbooks. We see what's happening. And as you've said, European nations have certainly had to figure it out recently. I'll ask the hardest question, though. What can we do? We know what the government should do. How do we change this government from its ideological course, though? They seem blind to it.
They have 25 months to continue down this path of destruction with the NDP and with their friends in the Green. And the Bloc, of course, not interested in anything more than just saying, hey, we're here, we're here to obstruct. We're here at the end of the day to ensure that Quebec gets its fair share. Look, I think the country is definitely down the wrong path. And to get away from there, we need a whole new way of approaching this. I'm going to be very blunt about this because I've never been a member of any other party but the Liberal Party. But my God, the Conservative Party today under Pierre Poilievre reminds me a lot of my Liberal Party in the 1990s. Practical, pragmatic, realistic, and saying these are the problems. This is where we go, and this is how we're going to get there. To me, I can see a lot of Liberals of my generation, the ones who are still working, the ones who are still out there busting their chops, going in that direction. And I think that's something that the Conservatives should take very, very much to heart. Don't mess it up. We have one shot at this, and the country needs a new leadership badly, desperately. We can't keep going the way we are right now.
Well, and we could be hitting other crises within this next 25 months, particularly constitutionally or unity-wise. The battle that's brewing up between Premier Daniel Smith and Environment Minister Guilbeault, I haven't seen that sort of language, between a premier and a federal government from the West anyways. It's getting more reminiscent of René Lévesque than anything else I've heard in a while. This could really blow up in a big way.
Well, it is, and it already, I think, has become very apparent. Daniel Smith's not backing off. Scott Moe's not backing off. I suspect Manitoba may go the same way. But the one I've spent a lot more time working on and looking at has been Atlantic provinces. The so-called red wall, it's gone. It's evaporated. Overnight in Nova Scotia, when you saw a 30, 40 cent a litre increase hitting people who happen to be, far less better off than the rest of the country on average, when you start hitting them and impacting them, and then saying, "Oh, here's a bit of here's a couple pennies to pay you back in terms of a rebate," which they know don't work. When you start hitting consumers, you start making people poor. You force them to make decisions that they are not comfortable with. I expect that the real blowback is going to come in provinces like Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, PEI, and Newfoundland when on election night, when that should happen. And I think Liberals know this. They lose most of their seats in that region of the country. Then the rest of it will be a steamroll. Because I think here in Ontario, with some exceptions, I think we're going the same direction as well.
Yeah, well, ideals and green dreams or even family loyalty to particular parties tends to go out the window if you can't make the rent or the mortgage payment, or you're worried about getting your kids through school, or even buying groceries for some people. So I could see a definite turnabout in the Atlantic provinces. It's just my fear. Especially it just made me cringe when you mentioned it. The amount of damage they could do in 25 more months, though, could be pretty excessive.
It can, and I think Canadians have to know that, and they have to be more outspoken. You get a pollster calling you, tell them you're not happy, you're not going to support this particular coalition government. I think when it gets to 40 and 45% for the Pierre Poilievre Conservatives, I think we may very well see Mr. Trudeau take a long walk off a surfboard in Tofino somewhere.
Yeah, I was speculating earlier that might come pretty soon. But when you look at the pool that this Liberal Party, I said it when I introduced before at the start of the show when you were coming on. I said, you're a member from back in the days when Liberals were pragmatic and sane. Now it's a party dominated by ideologues. I don't know where or who they might draw for a leadership that might turn things around. But I guess we could hope. There's still people out there that might turn that party around a bit.
I don't think so. I think the damage is done. And I think at this point, it's trying to protect the 70 or 90 or 100 members you think you can keep by having a transition at the leadership level. But if you're going to keep on the same dangerous path to economic perdition, good luck with that. You might be reduced to a rump, the same of which I saw in 2011. There's significant consequences and blowback coming. I think people see it every day. Every time there's an interest rate increase, more and more people's noses go on the proverbial waterline. Food prices are endemically inflationary, driven by energy prices to a large extent, which this federal government seems to be committed insanely at trying to raise. We should be pulling back, removing those carbon taxes, hitting net zero hard, and saying if we can achieve it scientifically, fine. If not, scrap it, because it's an idea that is extraordinarily pernicious to Canada and is likely to lead not just to economic dislocation, but potentially to a constitutional crisis on a scale I haven't seen in my lifetime, and I've been around a few of them.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. I mean, we can keep pointing it out at least, and letting people know, and at least moving towards a better future, hopefully, with things, and that's what you've been doing out there. So before I let you go, where can people find you with the Canadians for Affordable Energy and Gas Price Buddy and such? Yeah, sure. AffordableEnergy.ca is the site I often put my blogs up on. If you want gas price predictions, GasWizard.ca is probably the easiest one. And if you need to get a hold of me on Twitter, Gas Price Wizard. I'm usually there, usually with having a little bit of fun with everybody. Yes, no, likewise. Twitter's kind of my favorite playground too, but there's some serious business goes on there as well. So I appreciate you rushing in to come to talk to us today and this stuff you do, Dan. I mean, as I said, it could be a long wait, but I mean, we can mitigate the damage by continually exposing this and pushing while we can. And just hope for the best. Back at you, Cory. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate this. All right. Thanks, Dan. Yes, that was Dan McTeague. As I said, one of the last of a generation of liberals who used to be sane. And there's still a few hiding out there and everything, but things change, and hey, if the Conservatives are in too long and do the wrong things, it's time to turn around on them and look at something different too. But they're just so ideologically driven now. I'm glad Dan got in for the tail end of the program there, though. It's always good to talk to him. As I said, check him out online. He's very outspoken and a good voice to listen to on energy issues, because, hey, energy prices hit you everywhere. All right, that's all the time we've got today, guys. Boy, it does go by fast, even when I'm babbling away for a guest who was a little bit delayed. So thank you for all tuning in today on the Cowboy Network and live on the rest of those Western Standard channels. One more reminder, subscribe, share. Let's beat the blockage going on Facebook thanks to the bad liberal policies. And set aside some time. Make sure to tune in, and we'll all get together and do this again next week at this time.